On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Foundation for the Carolinas, inspiring philanthropy and empowering individuals to create a better community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte-Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
I'm probably a lot more vulnerable than I thought I was. And in addition to grief, having to accept that vulnerability has been very humbling, and I also have been very grateful. And I'm just sort of thankful for these little acts that keep me glued together. I don't think I'm that volatile by any means, but I'm just giving other people more credit for what I used to give myself credit for.
Marjorie Benbow is an intellectual property attorney. She focuses on technology transfer, licensing, corporate matters, and distillery and brewery law. She is also a flower farmer, contractor builder, scientist, and educator. She serves on the Board of Trustees of Rowan-Cabarrus Community College and the North Carolina School of Science and Mathematics. Marjorie previously served as Executive Director of the Charlotte office of the North Carolina Center of Biotechnology and in the Office of Technology Transfer at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. She has been recognized as among Charlotte's 20 most dynamic women, Charlotte's 50 most influential women, and as a Distinguished Rotarian. In this episode, we explore flower farming, a career in science, education, and the law, and lessons learned about love, grief, and gratitude. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Margie, you are a flower farmer.
Yes, I am.
How do you farm flowers?
So basically what I do is I have 20 acres of land, and I wanted to do something first for the pollinators and second for me, and I absolutely love flowers. So what I did was just said, I'm going to try it. And you can't lose for trying, or at least I lose if I don't try it. So basically what I did was cleared the fields, and not just cleared fields. You've got to understand there were 7 years of trees that had been sprouting in this out of sheer neglect. So I had to bring in these people that dug up roots, munched everything up or mulched everything, took care of that. And then what I ended up doing was getting a lot of sawdust and ordering zinnia seeds, because I wanted something that my ego could take as a beginner, and zinnias are fail-proof. Well, I thought they were fail-proof. So I set out and I probably put about 5 acres of zinnias out and 4 acres of sunflowers, and just decided to let the rest go this year because I was just beginning. And there was a huge torrential rain. So fast forward, nothing took. I was back at it again, bought some more flower seeds in bulk, and went to a sawmill and got a bunch of sawdust so that I could mix the seeds with it and broadcast it so that the seeds weren't concentrated. And this time it took. So I was able to get the sunflowers growing as well as the zinnias. And the zinnias were absolutely spectacular. They probably came up to my waist, all sorts of bright, happy colors. I can't tell you how many goldfinches, warblers, as well as butterflies. It was like the skies had a garden too. But where the sunflowers were a little bit different story. I had big fat deer. And as soon as a leaf popped out, I would see these deer just look at me and go, hey, I got here first. I'm going to eat it all. So literally where the sunflowers were, nothing grew. Just deer. deer grew.
What do you do with acres and acres of flowers?
This year I enjoyed them because I learned an important business lesson in farming, and that is you have to line up where your distribution channels are going to be, just like you do in business, or just like any inventor. You know, you might have the best idea, and then all of a sudden you've got tons of flowers. So if you were lucky enough to run into me around your birthday, I would typically go to Home Depot, Lowe's, Walmart, anything, get one of those big buckets, and you would get 1,000 flowers.
I will look forward to 1,000 flowers.
Okay.
What are your hopes for your flower farm?
My hopes are to make money, but also to enjoy it. It's heaven and earth.
Well, not only are you a flower farmer, you are also a contractor builder, and on this acreage is this old home that you are renovating.
That's right. And it's a lot of fun. Most of my ideas come in a napkin. I do spend a lot of time on the internet learning and studying because I'm not actually the one that puts the nail on the wall and hits the hammer. I'm sort of finding people to help me do this. And unfortunately, in that adventure, I find out a lot of people tell me things that aren't the case, or they like to take shortcuts. But it's been extraordinary. I went through $1,000 of propane gas in 1 month, and I said, there's something wrong here. And so I peeled back the beadboard, and the reason why I went through $1,000 of propane gas was there was nothing between the inside of the house and the outside of the house. So from insulation forward, working it. I have 3 snakes in there that keep the place rat-free. Sir Hiss, George, and I don't know, she's a 7-foot king snake, and I haven't seen them lately.
How old is the home?
90 years old. It's got a new roof on it, and beautiful new windows in there so that I, again, will not be heating all of North Carolina with propane gas.
I imagine you're opening up a lot of renovation magazines.
I am. And I can't say enough for Etsy, YouTube, and Pinterest.
Well, in addition to flower farming and building and renovating this home, you're also an attorney. You're a lawyer.
Yes, I am, and I like to sort of think of myself as the happy lawyer. And the reason why is I don't do drama. Family law, I don't do. Estates, I'll stay away from, as well as litigation. I will help a client that really wants to get to a yes with the other side, but I will not get into fighting. That's not what I think the world needs right now, or any time for that matter. I get to work with inventors, the creative types, artists, because I do intellectual property. So you might be familiar with trademarks, copyrights, patents, and licensing. Get to enjoy that. And I will say, no client in that subset comes in unhappy. They're like, I've got the coolest idea. And I get to learn from them, and that's something I always enjoy. Additionally, the other group that's sort of cropped up that I really enjoy is working with microbreweries, distilleries, and vineyards. They're just merry, and let's just keep it at that.
Margie, you're living life on your own terms right now, renovating this home, farming flowers, having a practice. I'd like to talk about this life that you've led and how you've gotten to this point. It hasn't always been flowers in your life, has it?
Let's just say different kinds of flowers. Yes, you're right.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Winston-Salem. In Winston-Salem, I feel very fortunate to have had 2 parents that pushed education on me for 2 different reasons. Both mom and dad said education is very important. I also feel very fortunate that they hammered into my head pretty is as pretty does, which made me, even when I didn't want to be good, I had to be good because mom and dad were very consistent with the rules where I couldn't play one off of the other. In addition to education, arts was always a big part of all of our lives. I'm the youngest of 5, and probably the one emotion that I remember in our house is laughter. So that's always a good feeling to have. The arts were really important. We would go to the North Carolina School of the Arts for dress rehearsals on rainy Saturdays, take classes at Sawtooth, anything. Enjoy the Reynolda House as a child.
Your dad overcame some challenges in his life.
Yeah, my father was pretty extraordinary. He was an intellect. He had a quirky sense of humor, very well read. And in his youth, he was quite an athlete. He wrestled at UNC Chapel Hill and boxed. They used to call him Hoss. He saw my mother, fell in love with her at first sight. They got married in a short courtship, just like mine was. And I guess he was 3 years after they got married, he started to feel like he was getting the flu, and it was 5 months before the vaccine was available. He caught polio. Mom had already had her first child, and she was expecting her second child. And Dad spent 13 months in an iron lung and lost probably 50% of his body weight, because remember, he was this athlete, and he was withering away into a skeleton of a person. Everybody who visited him in the iron lung said he never lost his smile and his sense of humor. When he came out, he had endured multiple surgeries, had actually been treated, thank goodness, at Warm Springs, Georgia, where the president had been treated. And he came out, but he was not the athlete that he had been before he went in. Instead, he had braces on his legs, and he was walking with the help of the crutches that wrap up around the forearms. He went back to his job. The job the company had offered him was to be a bookkeeper. Now, go back into the 1950s, and a bookkeeping job was just transactions where you would record, I guess, in the debit and credit column, and there was no mind work. That day, the first day he went back to work, he told his boss or whomever, "I quit. You've got it mixed up. I might not have a body, but I have a mind." So I think about my mom when Dad came back, and she said, "Well, how was your first day of work?" And he said, "I quit." Now, she had to have a second child with Dad in the iron lung, had gone back to live with her mother-in-law because of finances. And Dad came back and says, "We'll be okay." He had a lot of faith and just faith. Fast forward, he was working out, trying to get back to being athletic, shedding all the braces and the crutches, and someone approached him and said, "Willie," his name was William, said, "Willie, would you be interested in starting up a new department at R.J. Reynolds?" And Dad was always about trying new things, especially if it had to do with stimulating his intellect. And he said, "Sure, I'll try it." Well, go back to that time, and he helped implement the first computer system for R.J. Reynolds. The lesson that he always told us is, don't let anyone define you as handicapped. And he said, and the worst person that can define you as handicapped is yourself. And I look at the fact that I would not have had such a good life had he defined himself as handicapped, and he would have tried to raise 5 children on a bookkeeper's salary.
How have you taken that lesson with you in your life?
The most important thing I've ever done is learn to read. Because if I can read, I can renovate a farmhouse. If I can read, I can figure out how to farm. I just need to go back on those distribution channel lessons. But it was also the importance of not being constrained by someone telling you you can't do something. And it played out well. My female cousin and I wanted to play soccer back when Pele was hot. And we went to go sign up, and they said girls can't play soccer. Well, we got to play soccer. And it was because my dad and his brother knew the importance of not saying can't.
How would your parents have described you?
Probably in some ways they would have said I was definitely curious and energetic. I always wanted to try new things and learn new things. I think after 5 kids, they just sort of said if you don't get into trouble, they raise themselves. And so I stayed under the radar. I'd seen what my older brother and sisters had done and how they got into trouble. And I kind of figured out 3 rules is don't disrespect anybody, do well in school, come to dinner on time. And that was about it.
Well, you did do well in school, and you went to Chapel Hill, and you studied zoology. Why zoology? Because
I loved wildlife and learning all about animals. It was absolutely fascinating to learn everything from field ecology down to genetics. I particularly like field ecology in an area of ethology or animal behavior. I thought I was going to work next to Jacques Cousteau, but it was in a time when genetics were becoming important, And one of my girlfriend's fathers was a geneticist at Chapel Hill. So I took a few classes with him, and that was a lot of fun.
You thought of yourself as a scientist?
I did, definitely. I loved learning and discovery and observing, and science provides you that opportunity.
After graduating with Chapel Hill with your degree, you pursued a certificate in science education.
I did. It was right at the time when ecology funding had dropped down to about zero. So what I ended up doing was getting my education certificate so I could do something with my sciences. I absolutely loved teaching. I still do love teaching. There's nothing better than when I see a child, even if the child's older than I am, I should say the student, get excited.
Where did you teach?
I taught 2 places right after college. I went up to Massachusetts and Pittsfield, Mass., and taught at Miss Hall's preparatory school. And then I taught in Stokes County at Chestnut Grove Junior High. 2 very different worlds.
After this stint in teaching, you had an interest in getting back into science. What happened next?
In order to get back into science and research, what I did was I volunteered in South America, in Medellin, Colombia, and learned all about, at the time it was anticuerpos, or antibodies, or immunology. And I went down there to show a credible commitment to a graduate program that I wanted to become a bench scientist, because all of my undergraduate research and undergraduate classes had been mainly in this area of ecology, which isn't quite considered as rigorous, or let's just say I could have had fun doing that, but I couldn't have paid a mortgage doing that. I might have been able to buy a TP. So what I did was I went down to Medellin, Colombia, did research in immunology and worked in tropical medicine, and UNC Chapel Hill picked me up. There I received my Master's of Science in Public Health and performed research around Research Triangle Park in several areas. One was working with cystic fibrosis, and another was in the area of virology. That's where I had focused most of my research as a Master of Science. And then I was able to get into an area called nerve regeneration, and it was in nerve regeneration at Duke University specifically.
Margie, while you were doing this research in nerve regeneration, you met someone who changed your life. Who is it that you met?
I met a gentleman named Hector Henry, and he was a professor at Duke, but he lived in Concord, North Carolina. He was on grand rounds one day, and had asked his residents, he was a pediatric urologist specifically, and he asked his residents to set him up with someone hot. No, he said, and I prefer blondes. Well, I know I'm a blonde. The other part, I don't know. And my buddies who were in urology, which happened to be next to the neuroscience department where I was, knew that I had a thing for smart guys. So fast forward, there was a blind date, but it wasn't just a blind date, Mark. It was a double blind date, because the guy who instigated it knew that I did not like blind dates. And Hector had already warned that he had been on so many bad dates, he wanted to scope this person out. So this is a perfect double-blind situation. So all of a sudden, there's probably 8 residents from Duke that I had helped train in some capacity, usually in the area of cell culture. And they mainly had their girlfriends or wives, and I was soloing it because I wasn't dating anybody. And there was this mysterious man that I had never met before. And it was my blind date. And I was his blind date, and he was scoping me out, but I just thought he was a research scientist, because the line that my guy friends gave me was he was in charge of the clinical arm down in Concord, North Carolina. So talked. He was just back from Desert Storm. I really enjoyed his conversation. I did notice one thing is when I talked to him, I felt like the whole world, 200% of his focus, he had on me, and I had never felt that with anybody in my life. It was so unnerving that I called my mother at 9:10 that night. And you have to understand this, is that I was reared with several rules of etiquette, and one of the rules of etiquette is you don't call after 9. This was 9:10. And I called Mom, and I said, Mom, I've met somebody. Now, we just talked. I did not give him my phone number or anything. And she said, oh, well, she said, what time is it? I said, it's 9:10. I'm sorry, Mom. I said, I've met this guy, and he's just unnerving. I don't know what to do. And she said, young lady, I don't want to hear about this. She said, discretion. And then the next thing she did was she said, everything's going to be okay. Just relax. And then I immediately said, well, what happens if he doesn't like me? And she said, don't worry about that. And I don't want to hear about this. Discretion. So I said, okay, Mom, thanks. And this was the first time I'd ever called my mother about any boy. And I was almost 30. And she rolled over and told Dad, this is the man she's going to marry.
Well, he was hardly a boy.
True.
He was a few years older than you, wasn't he?
Yes, he was.
How many years older was he?
He was a couple of decades older.
In fact, he was 26 years older.
Yes.
Well, he found his young hot blonde, didn't he?
He did, indeed. Yeah, he did.
How would you describe Hector Henry?
A true Renaissance man. He was an extraordinary athlete, ran 6 miles a day, and when he didn't have much time, it was 4 miles during lunch. Worked out every morning for an hour and a half, lifted weights, read 3 books a week. The library kept him fed in books that he would like to read. He was a politician, he was a soldier, and he was one of the top doctors and surgeons in the United States. That's kind of all the things he did, but why I fell in love with him was because he had the biggest heart I had ever seen, and he was intellectually so curious. And there wasn't a day when I didn't learn something from him, coming from that amazing head of his.
You had a quick courtship.
3 months.
And what happened?
Well, he was a confirmed bachelor, and I was a confirmed bachelorette. I had no reason to get married, and he didn't want to try it again. I tease him. I used to tease him and say he grew on me like a fungus, and you can't get rid of a fungus. So we got married, and he imported me to Concord, North Carolina. Very different world than anything I'd seen here. I think he was chief of staff or vice president of medical affairs at, back then, Cabarrus Hospital, which is now Carolina's or Atrium Northeast.
This is now the early 90s.
Correct.
What turn did your career take?
I had to reinvent myself because as a research scientist, I couldn't find a job. And as someone energetic, I couldn't stay at home. So what I did was I started to look for something to do. And Hector and I had a discussion, and the discussion was, you got to do something. You've got too much energy to stay at home. So one of the first things I did was I worked at the health department in health policy, as well as I taught during my lunch hour. I taught microbiology during my lunch hour, and in the evening I taught anatomy and physiology. So here I was thankful that I had the teaching certificate and the science background. It still didn't kind of quench my thirst for, I would say, stimulating my brain. So we were talking about law school, MBA school, med school, and I had not applied for the PhD. I felt like that would be too constraining, even though it seemed like it would have been the next step. And Hector and I were talking about what to do, sort of analyzing the pros and the cons to each one. And I remember he looked at me and he said, Margie, I don't want you to go to med school. And at first blush, I was a little bit angry or frustrated with him. And I said, what are you doing? You're saying I can't do it? And he said, and the reason is you can't handle the drama. He said, there's a lot of ugly things out there. You'd be an excellent surgeon, excellent physician, but you could not handle people being ugly to each other. And you'll see it in medicine. And immediately, I sort of felt like he knew me better than I knew myself, because I remember that was the reason why I pulled my application or deferred my acceptance, was because when I was volunteering, I saw a lot of sad things in medicine, like people whose family never visited them, or people who didn't have family or friends, or people who were being yelled at and they were the patient in the hospital bed. And I just was shocked by the fact that everybody doesn't experience love from their family. And he was right. So I ended up going to Wake Forest and commuting from Concord to get my law and MBA degree.
So here you are, a scientist with a master's degree in public health, pursuing a JD and an MBA. Those are very different ways of processing knowledge and very different ways of thinking. What were you thinking, taking a JD, MBA?
Well, I had done very well getting my master's of science degree, and I remember sitting here in law school and getting very humbled, just knocked down several notches. Business school wasn't so bad because there was a lot of math in it, so that made life easy for me. But what really struck me is in science, law, and business, it was like there's three different paradigms, and they all clash a lot of times, and sometimes they complement one another. But I realized in science, it's usually what are the facts or what are the truths. And what I mean by that, the natural laws. And what I found out in business is what's the bottom line? Save time, avoid errors, and save money or make money. And then when I was in law school, it went down to what are the laws? And often the facts would get kind of pushed into these laws to help win a case, or Wake Forest focuses on appellate law. And I just realized that those are three different worlds. And sometimes, actually, as an attorney, I find out that I can tell people a business answer or say is, cash flow makes sense to do this, and they'll back up. And even though from a legal perspective, there might be a different answer.
Margie, you did not go to med school to avoid drama, and yet you went to law school.
Okay. So what can I say? And that's why I focus on happy law. I mainly stick to transactions. And the local bar even jokes if I walk into the courtroom and they say, does lawyers mutual, know you're in here.
Margie, once you earn your JD MBA, you did some work in management consulting and also in higher ed before taking a position as director of the North Carolina Center for Biotechnology in Charlotte. What was that work?
That work was a lot of fun. And what I mean by that is that I had the three worlds combined. It was the law, the science, specifically the biotech, where I'd spent probably a decade doing research, and business. I was able to help, which is an important core value of mine, is service. I was able to help schools, businesses, and people who just wanted to know more about biotech, mainly economic developers, as well as scientists. And from a creative side, I was able to create something out of nothing. And what that something was mainly buzz. So, for example, working with the Charlotte Area Science Network, I might be trying to put on events that would be, we had something called Science Cafe, which was coffee and conversation with the experts. And we would try to bring in people, not only from the biotech sector, but given the fact that that was my focus, you can imagine, I can just call so-and-so and make some things happen. I was able to even work with the motorsports industry. And together with the motorsports industry, we created a challenge, a science, technology, engineering, and math challenge, or STEM challenge, where I wrote a grant and was able to receive $300,000 matched by about $500,000 to help get underrepresented and underprivileged eighth graders into the area of STEM. And it focused on a combination that was kind of fun for the kids of motorsports and biotech. And some of the wonderful partners were the Rockingham Drag Strip, in addition to the North Carolina Research Campus, Rowan-Cabarrus Community College, and several of the schools in the surrounding regions, Rowan, Kannapolis, Cabarrus, and Richmond County schools.
Margie, for several years, you were at the center or the intersection of science, education, business in a multi-county regional area. Did you enjoy that role?
Absolutely, I did. And it was, again, always about helping and seeing a difference. And my days were filled with, if someone articulated a need, for example, how you and I met, Rosie Tong, in the area of bioethics, and all of a sudden she might mention something. And it might not be immediate, but it might be 3 months down the road that someone would need a bioethicist or have a tough question, and it was just like playing matchmaker.
During this time that you led the Biotechnology Center in Charlotte, your husband continued to serve in the armed forces, and your husband was deployed.
Yes, since 9/11, actually that was way back, 9/11 in 2001, I was technically working for the International Monetary Fund in D.C. It was very interesting because my husband was able to get a message to me. And on my answering machine at the office at the IMF, he said, that SOB bin Laden has attacked the United States. Stay in D.C. You'll be safe. Do not leave. And that was all of his message. So I guess it was because of his military rank. And it looked like it came in about 27 minutes after the Pentagon got hit. So I walked to my hotel, and it looked like a bad movie. Subsequent to that, I think it was around November, he went to Afghanistan to help set up some of the medical units. He was a medical commander. And then he came back after 2 weeks. He had 2 deployments in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Germany, and 1 in D.C. So from the time 2001 and 2012.
And during this period of time, while he's deployed overseas, he's also serving on the Concord City Council.
That's right, he is. He did a yeoman's job. He learned how to use Skype. He made sure that there were no violations where he was still visible, and he would Skype in even if it were 2 a.m.
That made you a politician's wife.
It made me a politician's wife from the very first day I got married in 1992, yes. A lot of visibility.
Margie, in 2011, you received some bad news.
Yes, it's sort of like 9/11. You always remember where you are when you receive bad news. I was at the national meeting for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society, or LLS, and Hector had come back from Iraq, and he was gray. Hector always was brown as a bean, even in the middle of winter, and especially, if you can imagine, after a desert deployment, he should be brown. Well, when he came back gray, I just didn't, my spidey senses went off that there was something really, really bad. So he was able to finally get a bone marrow. And I was at the national meeting Friday night, Orlando, and he received a diagnosis of myelodysplastic syndrome, or MDS, which is a very bad blood cancer. And it was shocking, but I had to have a good positive way to look at it. And many years ago, Hector, who was like super athlete, came up to me and he put his fingers on my neck and he said, "Baby doll, I don't care what size you are." He's lying right through his teeth, but he said, "I don't care what size you are, but I do worry about your resting heart rate and pulse." He said, "Maybe you ought to exercise and get it to drop down some." And I said, "Well, I don't like to go to the Y because I don't like seeing myself in the mirror, and I miss playing team sports." So he said, "Well, okay." And he was always good about ways to create solutions. So the next day, he had thrown out a bunch of pamphlets. And I picked the purple one, LLS, and started to train for my first half marathon. And it actually ended up being a really good thing for me to do because I would pick a half marathon for when he returned from a deployment, and I would train during those 6 months and get ready. And it was a nice way to kind of give me a goal. I wanted to look good for Hector, and I wanted to beat my last time and, get another shiny medal. And so I was doing half marathons from probably 2008 to when he returned in 2012. And I'd already raised maybe $40,000 for LLS. And it was such a good place to be because I didn't have to worry about the calls. I had randomly picked the right brochure and paid it forward, and I could just focus on the disease. And I kind of would like to say that it wasn't really focusing with the disease because Hector was so strong about things. It was more like living with a new blood condition that caused him, yes, to get chemo, yes, to get transfusions and platelets, but he lived with the disease.
How did he manage his diagnosis, and what did you learn from him in his approach to it?
The first thing he did was he read a lot, and that's something that he and I both did as we would learn. And we sought out the best person. The night that I heard that Hector had a diagnosis, talking about being looked after by the angels, I was sitting down with Derek Ragavan, who was the brand new president that was coming in to run Levine Cancer Center as the executive director for the Biotech Center, just to make an introduction. He was on the big board of LLS, and he asked me, like you often see in these kind of causal events, what brings you to this meeting in Orlando? And I said, funny you said that, because 30 minutes ago, my husband was diagnosed with MDS. And he offered to help so that we could see somebody who was good at Carolina. And I felt blessed that Hector had an extraordinary medical career because he could open doors at Wake Forest, where he was also on faculty. And we eventually were able to be treated in Houston, Texas, where, believe it or not, he had some residents that he knew from his Duke days when he was a faculty member at Duke. And it was always nice to go down to see his students.
And that was at MD Anderson?
Correct. And even when he had low blood counts, he and I would be running in Herman Park. He wasn't going to let potential interference with chemo. Sometimes when you have chemotherapy, it messes up your heartbeat. And he was always concerned about his heart. He wanted to have a strong heart. And that's why he worked out his heart every day with running. We'd be running in Herman Park for 2 miles at least every day in Houston.
How are you managing his illness?
Denial. I think I do know I compartmentalized and focused on today, because that's the only thing any of us are given. I felt like Hector did a lot to protect me from the truth. And I mean protect me, because he was always concerned. That's the soldier in him about protecting me. And he would just, when I could tell that his chest was hurting him because his oxygen levels were low, because his hemoglobin or his iron was low, I could see his jaw clenching, but he would stay strong and not complain. And I feel fortunate because he never complained. And I feel that that was one of the best ways he protected me. He never complained. He continued to work. He continued to exercise. He continued to be a politician. And he continued to stay fun. We laughed every day. And that's good. He looked at every day as a gift, as do I. And gratitude was something that when it got to be really scary, like towards the last couple of weeks in his life when he caught a bad infection because he didn't have any white blood cells, I would get really scared. And I would sit and do what my mother always taught me to do, and that is, she would say that one of the biggest sins in the world is to not be grateful. And I would find something to be grateful about, at least 10 things. It might be the fact that a friend brought me a chocolate bar, which is my drug of choice. Just something just to keep me going. And sure enough, I would get back into the moment and just be glad that Hector was next to me and we could share.
A time came when he passed.
Yeah. Worst day of my life. Yeah. It did. I had promised him that I'd land on my feet. I try. It's harder done than said, but at least I'm falling forward.
We've talked previously that on that day, a lot came to your mind as to what you had to do next.
Yeah, the world doesn't stop when you face something like this. Yeah, he passed on Thanksgiving, and I was, yeah. And so all of a sudden I was caught on Thanksgiving Day, and that means nobody's around. I'm caught on Thanksgiving Day trying to plan a memorial service. And I didn't even know how to do that. A memorial service, how do I do things? What do I do? He wasn't supposed to pass away because everything was looking good, but he did pass away. And I had this silly thought, and I know it was superficial, but I guess it wasn't, is this is my last date with Hector. I better look good. And I called a friend of mine, and I said, can you find me a beautiful black dress? And this was one of the biggest acts of kindness. She went out on Black Friday and brought me like 12 black dresses so that by Sunday I would look okay. And yeah, I appreciated it very, very much because I wanted to knock it out of the park. This was a special person, extraordinary in every way. We had 3 fights our whole married life. I don't remember what they were about, but I do know they were all my fault because I escalated. And I just wanted everything to be perfect. And it was.
And he has since been interred at Arlington National Cemetery.
Yeah, that was an interesting journey because it takes a long time for the resting to take place. And Hector passed away on Thanksgiving. I got a phone call on Valentine's Day from Arlington National Cemetery to make arrangements for when he could be buried in Arlington. And I just had to kind of laugh, like, well, in a way, I guess it's a good Valentine to know that we're at least on the schedule. And he said, you're really nice. The other lady that I called wasn't so happy about being called on Valentine's Day. So, we chuckled or whatever. And it would have been longer than 7 months for me to get Hector buried had I not chosen like the one Friday that nobody wants. And that's Friday of college graduation and Mother's Day. So did that, was able to get it done. And what happened, which was interesting, is the day that we buried him, that night I had my first set of dreams, and the next day I laughed. Now, if you can go back to the statement that I made that my family's atmosphere was laughter, for me or any of my siblings not to laugh is pretty bad. So I had gone about 7 months without laughter or dreams, and they just came back to me.
What were those 7 months like for you?
Hell. I couldn't remember anything. I couldn't finish a sentence. I had some friends not understand that I was spiritually diminished. And one just outright got mad with me. And I said, I'm trying. And I would not call and ask any of my friends for help and consistently complain because I thought I was an independent person. But what this journey with grief has helped me realize is I'm not independent at all. I'm needy. I'm dependent, I'm undependent, any other thing you can say. And I take joy in the fact that there's this magic called friends because they reach out to you and they keep you afloat. And I'm not so sure why. There's no genetic reason for it or evolutionary perspective for why it happens, but it's just this magic thing that comes from the human heart. And I'm so grateful for it because it's just like my girlfriend who went out and got me a beautiful dress. I needed her. Or the girlfriend who just called and said, hey, I'm coming over, Margie, to spend the night with you. You don't need to be in your house alone. And I said, I'm fine. She didn't listen. She came over and we sat on the couch and knitted that night.
Margie, what did you come to understand about grief?
For me, I'd like to give credit to a woman named Beth Harden who works at UNC Charlotte because she really helped with several pieces of advice. The first thing she did, I think, was post on my Facebook page that grief knows no calendar. I didn't realize how profound and spot on that is because the grief is still with me, just like my losing my mother or my father. I still have that grief in me. My husband was a different level of grief. When you hold a person's hand and you don't know where they start and you stop, and all of a sudden that person's not there anymore. That's the type of grief you feel. I never felt that with my mom and my dad. But what I had to do was sort of take a lesson from like Alcoholics Anonymous, where I had to realize there was something bigger than myself. And that if grief had no calendar, I might as well just accept it. Well, accepting takes a long time, and I still have what I call leaks, where there's a trigger, and it will make me cry for some reason. I don't know why I cry, but I just do. And so I just accept that grief in me, and it's made me a better person in a lot of ways. I look at it like the Claritin commercial. Every time I'm hit with a punch in the left or the punch in the right or a gut punch, like when I lost Hector, I start to see more beautiful things. The flowers look more beautiful. I might become more grateful for things. particularly the little things. With grief, I felt like I was a little bit blindsided by one point, and that was the fact that I thought I had been independent all these years. Hector and I had like two spheres of influence, and when we came together, they were very nice. I had my own life. He had his own life. But like Beth Harden taught me, she said, Margie, you've been in a duet situation where you'll do something and then he echoes a beautiful song. You know, if you can imagine, is it the magic flute, the queen of the night? And you're doing your thing, but you don't have that person singing. And when she gave me that analogy, she was so spot on, because I had been doing all these things. I had been working in Brazil, doing all this stuff, but I didn't have my duet. So my independence made me realize I am not. It was so humbling. And I think that's another way I became a better person. And last, because we had a happy life together, I feel like all that rawness and sadness has been turned to joy. Because when I do have remembrance, it makes me smile. Right after it happened, it made me want to go into the fetal position. And all that joy that came from when he was with me on this side of life, let's say 1992 to before when he passed away, it's joy now. And I think that that's something that's happened because I've accepted the grief. When I had not accepted the grief, it was raw.
Do you feel his presence?
Yes. Just as I do with anybody who's loved me. My parents are with me, my grandmother, my cousins that I've lost, and even the people that are still here on earth with me. And that's the beautiful part about the human heart.
Margie, when we reconnected, you called yourself a merry widow. Yes,
I am a widow because of the grief I'll have in me forever. And I will always be merry. My mother said I came out laughing when she had me. But I just feel like it's a promise that I made to myself and also to Hector that I wouldn't miss a beat. I missed 7 months of beats until I could sleep again and have dreams again, waiting for him to get buried in Arlington. But having to recreate myself where the purpose isn't a family has been very tough. My purpose has been, regardless of if I was married, 8 years old or not, my purpose has probably been twofold, and that's service and learning. With Hector, all of a sudden it was, how can I make something magical around him? And typically there was service involved, whether it was Rotary or a not-for-profit board. And then all of a sudden that purpose wasn't there. And he was probably bigger than a purpose. It was my fuel as well. Because if the home is happy, then happiness seems to flow elsewhere for me. So I had to redefine myself, and my dad's intellect actually probably helped me a lot. We went back to a book that he made me read when I was 12 years old. I think it was called Alpha Awareness by Wally Minto, and it was talking about the inner child of the past. And the inner child of the past for me was someone who was curious, someone who liked to play around with art, even though I'm not very good at it. And I'd always dreamed of living in the country and having lots of acreage. I've always enjoyed building, whether it was with Lincoln Logs or something bigger. And it just kind of came. And then there's that creative part that you get to do as a contractor or a builder. And then when you work in the garden, it's all about creation and a celebration. So I try to, when I say do things on earth, I try to continue to do that. And of course, reading comes usually in the evening. But the other part is that who is Margie by herself? And that's been a hard discovery. And part of that's been shaking any kind of drama. I was always intolerant of drama. And then after experiencing death and disease with my mother and my father, and then my husband, and also dealing with war and people passing away. When my husband had a soldier die or get injured, I decided that drama has no place in my life. So that became a real cleansing point for me. And if I could say one thing, it's just get rid of drama, shake it as fast as you can, because it is such a waste of energy. And I think it's made the people who feel the same way I do like me more, and the people who like drama, they don't want to be around me.
Margie, what do you know about yourself now that you didn't know when you were younger?
I'm probably a lot more vulnerable than I thought I was. And in addition to grief, having to accept that vulnerability has been very humbling. And I also have been very grateful. And I'm just sort of thankful for these little acts that keep me glued together. I don't think I'm that volatile by any means, but I'm just giving other people more credit for what I used to give myself credit for. When I was younger, I used to think that the successes that came my way were more of a result of what I did. And then now through my life of grief, experiencing vulnerability, and understanding just how interdependent, undependent, non-independent, however I want to say it, I'm starting to realize just how important others are, pitching up my successes.
What's next for you, Margie?
In the short term, I'm going to work on my distribution channels for my flower farms.
Thank you for your time today, Margie.
Okay. Thank you. I had a good time.
Marjorie Benbow is an intellectual property attorney. She earned a bachelor's degree in zoology and a master's degree in public health from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and a joint MBA JD degree from Wake Forest University. And now, a personal word. Marjorie Benbow goes by many names: Maggie, Marge, Margie, and Marjorie. I've called her Margie ever since first meeting her about a decade ago at an ethics conference at UNC Charlotte. Her many names reflect her many interests. She has multiple projects underway, as I suspect she always has, from designs and colored markers on her craft table, to farming and home renovation and helping clients patent inventions, to maybe teaching microbiology and anatomy and physiology again. She is devoted to a life of learning and service. Margie is also redefining her life after the loss of her husband. She has asked herself hard questions about purpose and meaning. She has restructured her career and passions to live life more freely around the natural laws that guide her. Her curiosity, her creativity, finding joy in helping others. Margie is also working on smaller, but no less significant, moments. She shared with me that Friday nights were movie and popcorn nights with her husband. Margie is working on watching movies alone. Listening to Margie, I thought of my own feelings after the death of my dad. I felt great sadness for him when he died, but not for me. I went on with my life without much change or interruption. I managed his death with a stoicism that my dad also displayed in his life about what we can and cannot change. But my grief was delayed. I have come to miss him very much. I dream about him. 20 years on, I feel the finality of his loss, and I wish I could talk to him, and he could talk to me. I wish he was here. Listening to Margie, I also thought of my own marriage, and the day that will come when either Laura or I will not be here. I can't get my mind around it. My marriage is the greatest event of my life and a source of endless support and inspiration. We do laugh a lot. Laura is 5 years younger than me, and we have this joke that she wants her 5 years of widowhood now while she is still young enough to enjoy it. She imagines it as an extended weekend pass. Just the kind of humor that keeps our marriage in the moment. Laura and I have been married for 21 years. It feels like a week has gone by. We keep photo albums to remind ourselves just how much we have enjoyed in so short a time. Margie said something during our conversation that I know is true. The other side of grief is gratitude. As sadness fades and we begin to emerge again, the memories we have are good ones. What didn't matter that we thought did, doesn't anymore. What does matter that we didn't appreciate, we are grateful for now. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners, and to my teammates, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website on lifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.